few more people in here. So let's go ahead and get started. So for those that don't know me, I'm Ken Smith. I'm one of the rocket scientists here in Rocket Pool and a node operator with Rocket Pool, and I'm joined today by two of the members of the team. First out there is Mav and Maverick. How you doing?
Morning, Ken. I'm doing all right. It's a pretty cold morning here in New Zealand. I believe it's the first time in 50 years that we've had snow down to kind of sea level in the main centres overnight. For context, some winters we don't get snow at all here, so it's a bit of a novelty. And yeah, I don't think I'll be going outside much today. Let's put it that way. It's a bit chilly, but otherwise, yeah, great to be here with you, Ken, and Joe, and everyone in the audience, and hopefully a few more listening on the YouTube recording later on.
Excellent. And then we're also joined here by Joe. Good afternoon to you, Joe.
Good morning / afternoon / evening, everybody.
Yeah, so it's been kind of a fun week. I was able to catch part of the Bankless DAO call with Langers and Dave, and that was kind of fun to listen into and hear questions from other people that are not within the Rocket Pool community ask questions about Rocket Pool. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think they did a good job sharing, well, certainly a few snippets that I hadn't heard before about the history of Rocket Pool, kind of how it came to be. We have a recording of that, and we're working with the Bankless DAO guys to release that content. At this stage, it sounds like their plan is to publish the entire recording later on towards the end of the month. So I guess we'll probably align with that. We'll probably cut it up into snippets so people can listen to whichever section they prefer. But I think, yeah, Dave and Langer did a pretty good job sharing about the background of Rocket Pool. So when that does come out eventually, definitely worth a listen. I believe you may be able to listen to the recording in its entirety on the Bankless DAO Twitter page, if that Twitter Spaces recording is still kind of available. But otherwise, yeah, keep an eye out for it on the Rocket Pool YouTube.
Oh, excellent. I can go back then, hopefully, and listen to the first 15 minutes that I was late to. So I'm excited to kind of hear that and see when it comes out. So in terms of today's agenda, I thought there were a number of things that we could kind of talk about. Got it kind of grouped into a number of settings. Some to start off with is node operators. A lot has changed in that space since we spoke last week. Then rETH stakers, a couple of things regarding incentives and the deposit pool. And then last but not least, we can finish up a little bit with some protocol developments. I'd like to talk a little bit about Atlas and getting excited and nervous about that at the same time. And then there's been a lot of movement in the kind of governance channel about a number of things that I thought we could conclude today's call with. So I encourage folks, if you haven't already seen the agenda yet in trading, to join in. Feel free to add things, and certainly if you have questions throughout this thing, just raise your hand and come forward. But Joe, let's talk about node operators first, right? So I went to bed last night and I saw that you had pushed out a new release of Rocket Pool. What does it do for us?
So there's a new release. It is 1.6.5. It is a minor release. There's not a lot of changes in this one, which is nice for kind of getting back to that slower cadence that we had pre-merge. And then during the merge, there was like 50 updates all flying out every day. And so now we're back to the more traditional kind of like slower cadence with little patches and then larger feature releases. So this one has updated clients. I believe it updates Nethermind, Bisu, Lighthouse, Nimbus, and MevBoost. They all came out with updates since 1.6.4 was released. It adds a little bit of optimization. It adds a fix that people who were joining and hadn't claimed for interval 0 because they weren't eligible for it yet, or they had and it just wasn't downloading the file, that would break Grafana because it needs that file in order to figure out how many rewards you've accumulated. So I'd set it up so now it just downloads it for everybody regardless, which is fine. And then there was a lot of improvements around the native mode setup experience. So new users that are interested in trying out native mode are the guide and documentation and supporting sort of smart node stack has been much improved for those guys, where previously it was kind of one of those, all right, you're on your own, best of luck situations. Now there's actually more of a kind of like standardized workflow, we'll say, to setting that up. So most node ops, like Docker and hybrid mode users, won't really notice much, just client updates. But the native guides have some interesting things to look at. That's what this offers.
What is one of the reasons somebody would want to do native mode?
So native mode is primarily reserved for experienced Linux users like sysadmins and things that do not like Docker. And it's a fairly small audience, I would say, because a lot of experienced sysadmins and stuff understand what Docker and containerization is, and they are perfectly happy sort of letting the traditional smart node stack run in that mode because it's easier at the end of the day. But I know that there are some people that don't like it, or there are some people that their environment can't support it, or they're running on an operating system that it doesn't work very well with, things along those lines, and they just want to have that sort of like complete unilateral customization over everything instead of having the standardized setup. And native mode is really meant for those kind of users.
Okay. What about, I've been kind of watching some questions go, and I'm curious on your opinions on a few of these things. I mean, one, post-merge or even pre-merge with some of these, Besu and Nethermind were causing us grief with memory leaks and some bugs. What's the latest on those things and the recommendations? Should we be using Besu? Is it up and working? What about Nethermind? Do we need extra RAM for that, or what do you recommend?
Here's what I've noticed in my experimentation. Bezu is kind of hit or miss. It works or it doesn't. It looks like, long story short, there are some lingering concurrency problems that I seem to be experiencing a lot, and a lot of users are as well. Where essentially in bonsai mode, which is the sort of special sauce that makes Bezu not need to prune ever, there are situations where it will try simultaneously like writing to the database twice, or it'll try writing and reading at the same time. And it gets a little confused when that happens because the writes tend to compete with each other and break things. So you'll see things like transactions or blocks being considered invalid because the nonce is too low because it hasn't updated the nonce to include both of the new pending transactions yet, that kind of thing. Sometimes you'll see like account balances differ again because the database hasn't been updated with the latest stuff yet, stuff like that. And so in general, a restart will fix it, or a restart of Besu and the consensus client will fix it, but it's not an ideal workflow. So they are still working on a lot of that stuff. Kind of like now that the merge has happened, they're exploring all of these different bug reports and issues people are posting, and slowly finding all of these lingering issues one at a time and stomping them out. So 22.7.4, compared to the previous version that we were using, which was 7.2, does fix some of those problems. It doesn't fix all of them, but it does fix some of them, and so it should be more stable than the previous version. But I've been talking with their dev team, and they're not done yet. They still have more fixes coming down the pipe and things. So it's, like I said, it's kind of hit or miss. For a lot of people, it works fine. For some people, it doesn't work fine. Nethermind, on the other hand, does seem to work very reliably well. I've been using it on some of my nodes, and I've never had any sort of concurrency problems or any of the other issues that were plaguing Besu. So it seems to work just fine. The only thing is it does have some memory issues where occasionally it'll use more RAM than your system has. It goes out of memory, it crashes, it restarts, and kind of carries on from there. So that is still a thing, but it is something that the development team there is aware of. They are working on it, and as soon as it is sort of like captured and fixed, I think we'll have a pretty significant update for that too, and I'll make a note of it. The other thing is it looks like it's very hard to track down and squish this particular memory leak because they've been working on it for quite a while, and they have a lot of interesting profiling tools related to the new .NET framework that they're using that don't seem like they're capturing it quite well. But for the most part, I mean, Nethermind seems to be working fine. I do recommend you have at least 16 gigs of RAM if you're going to use Nethermind. I don't think having any lower is going to do you any favors. I would probably recommend even 32, so it's got room to breathe and kind of grow before the memory leak takes over.
Yeah, those are great recommendations. And then I saw a post, and maybe it was support or general, that was asking about client diversity, and the individual was asking about Aragon, and so that kind of brings the question: when Aragon and when Lodestar?
So now that Aragon has removed their alpha and beta label, which I understand the code is exactly the same, they just removed the label for sort of like semantic reasons or whatever, is something that I can look at. If they think it's production ready, then I'm inclined to say, okay, let's give it a shot and throw it on Prater and see how it does and stuff. The community has had mixed feelings about Aragon's support as well, and I'm sure if you take a look at the trading channel, you'll see what I mean. Just drop Aragon's name, and you'll see all people will be like. So I know Ramon in particular says it works absolutely fine. There's no problems, and Invis's opinion differs and things. So it's at least worth experimenting with now that we've gotten some of the post-merge kind of stabilization fixes in place, and we can start focusing longer term like that. So I think I will probably release one of the betas that we have. It's got like Nimbus and split mode, and it's got Lodestar support in there. I'll probably throw Aragon into that as well, and people can give that a shot on Prater for now.
Okay, cool. Since you mentioned kind of post-merge stuff, let me jump to one of our sub-item 4 here, which is the post-merge performance. It's kind of interesting. My node had a number of issues, I think, just because I had some internet outages, and then I was on the Bezu that didn't really kind of do the merge very well. Then I had to switch over to Geth on a new machine, and so I've been kind of tweaking mine, and I really don't know what to expect from post-merge performance, other than I don't think my node is performing, or my new node is performing as well as it did pre-merge. What should we be expecting, or what can node operators do now to kind of up their effectiveness score?
So some of this is things you can do today, and some of it is not. Some of it is just a function of the fact that we didn't really know what the merge was going to do from a performance perspective, if that makes sense, like from a resource perspective, until it actually happened. Now that it has happened, and we can see that things are certainly stable enough, like we've got 99% participation on the beacon chain and stuff. Like we know that things are sort of working well enough to be functional for now, but they could be better. And so you are seeing a lot of the client teams, especially the execution layer client teams, putting out performance improvements specifically around the final bout of syncing and the ability to sort of like process blocks and give the consensus client a block proposal or handle a fork choice update or things like that. So one of the things that I see a lot is sometimes you will miss an attestation because your execution client hasn't finished processing an update that your consensus client told it about yet. So it takes a long time for the consensus or the execution client to kind of like process new blocks that are coming in, and the consensus clients to get the latest state with the latest blocks and things. So some of the execution client teams are working on that. Like Nethermind's latest release, 1.14.3, it does some optimizations to make it faster to import blocks and to kind of like let people attest correctly instead of just sort of missing attestations because they attested to the wrong block entirely, that sort of stuff. So the client teams are definitely aware of the we'll say the resource issues or the performance issues around attesting, and the fact that people are kind of like missing a few a day and stuff like that. And so they are working on optimizations to improve that. And Lighthouse in particular mentioned to me that they have so a lot of interesting optimizations, especially like IO related stuff coming down the pipe. But from your perspective, like what can you do today, since that waiting for the client teams to update things is kind of out of your scope? What you can do today mostly revolves around, I guess it revolves around hardware and stuff. Like there's not much you can do from a software perspective, like changing your operating system settings or tweaking certain configuration details and things. It's mostly just like, if you want to have better performance today, you need to have faster IO and you need to have more RAM. That's what it comes down to. And it seems like having a bursty CPU is useful as well. One of these that like stays at a low clock rate until it's really required, and then it can kind of spike to a super high one, like some of the Intel and AMD CPUs can do. That seems to be somewhat helpful for Bisu and Teku, at least.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and then I mean, the other things I suppose that occasionally I see in support is just peers, right? But I mean that applies pre-merge, post-merge, and setting your time correct, right?
Yeah, the peering stuff hasn't changed at all between pre-merge and post-merge. Like if you were able to get good peers before, you should be able to get good peers after, and vice versa. If your peers were terrible before, the merge isn't going to help you out.
Okay. And then I saw that you've made some improvements to the docs as well too. What are some of the highlights of those?
So the docs were woefully out of date, I think, and I had to basically put a label on some of them that's like, look, this is out of date. I know I'm going to work on it. We're going to fix it up soon. So for the last like week and a half, probably 2 weeks at this point, I have just sat down and said, okay, I'm like 164 is out the door. The merge is stable. Rocket Pool is working. I need to go update all the documentation. And so that's what I did between 164 and 165. That's why 165 doesn't have a lot of stuff in it, because I spent all my time working on the docs updates. So a couple of things. The order flow of setting up a new node has changed a little bit. So what I'll ask you to do is kind of like set up your machine, then set up a fallback, then do your wallet and look at the fee distributor stuff, how fee recipients work, how priority fees work, whether or not you want to opt into the smoothing pool. And I have a whole documentation thing that explains what the smoothing pool is and how it works and how you opt in. Then there's an entirely new article about MEV and MEV relays and MEV boosts, and I had the team check it out, and Langer said it was the most comprehensive, complete picture of how the sort of like MEV ecosystem works that he's ever read. So I took a lot of my own experience and a lot of the stuff, the existing literature that's out there, and kind of like rolled it together into this thing that explains to a node operator. Here, from your perspective as a node operator, here's what MEV is, here's how it works, here's what you can expect from it, and most importantly, here are the relays that you can choose from and stuff. So that's out there, but I'm sure not a lot of people know about it. And when we change in version 1.7, when we change MEV from opt-in to opt-out, I will be linking to that particular page a lot, so that people who don't understand MEV and have never really turned it on or played with it at all will have something to look at that can easily walk them through the deal with that. Then there's a bunch of, like a complete rewrite of native mode. That took about a week to do, which focuses on making permissions management easier, better, it's more simpler, works with a bunch of the automated stuff as well. We had someone come in from native mode yesterday who took a look at it and said, like, it works better, except he ignores all that stuff because he does it all by himself anyway. And so it's kind of like, well, okay, I spent the week doing this for no reason because you're just doing it by yourself. It's fine. But at the very least now, native mode users who are coming in and don't have an existing setup and stuff should have a much easier time. So it's kind of like a complete overall documentation, mostly from a post-merge perspective, getting rid of all the pre-merge terminology, making sure everything talks about post-merge only, and from a redstone perspective, like the claims page in particular, the RPO rewards claims was still using the old pre-redstone stuff. So that's also gotten a complete overhaul and now only focuses on the post-redstone claim system.
Yeah, no, that's kind of funny. In fact, Joe, anything you put in big red text, I tend to skip over too, just so you know. So,
which is like, it's exactly the opposite of what you're trying to do, because big red text is like, hey, this is important. If there's one thing you're going to read on this page, read the big red box. And if everybody skips over it, what's the point?
Yeah, but no, in all serious, Joe, I think I'm with Langers on that. That honestly, you know, I've dove into MEV a couple of times in my research role, and you know, it is very confusing. And then I read your page on MEV, and I thought, well, Joe explains it so well. It seems simple. You honestly should think about maybe putting that into a Twitter thread and send that out, or get the intern to do that, because it was excellent for anybody trying to understand MEV.
Yeah, I'll ask the intern to do it. Twitter's definitely more of the intern's purview for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So the one other thing you touched on there, and before we get onto the rETH staking side of the house here, is the smoothing pool. And you talked a little bit about, okay, the road ahead when we have to kind of mandate MEV. What are we thinking about the smoothing pool in terms of its performance, and when do we foresee starting these phases and engaging governance about the requirements for MEV?
So let's see. As of right now, the smoothing pool has about 69% of nodes are opted in, just under 1,100, which is awesome. 44% of total mini pools. So we're seeing the same trend we saw last period, which is a lot of these smaller node operators are opting into it for the reduction in variance and kind of the smoothing effect. And the larger node operators don't really care because they already have enough mini pools that they are fairly smooth on their own. I've talked to a few of them, and yeah, essentially what it comes down to is they don't want to do it until we force or at least improve our MEV stance, so that node operators who don't know about it are kind of confronted with it and have to either explicitly opt out or pick a relay and opt in, that kind of thing. I think last time I checked, it was like almost 90% of mini pools had it turned on, so it's not that much of a drag, but it's more than zero, and at the end of the day, the bottom line matters, I suppose. But let's see, the rewards period started about 6.5 days ago, and it has almost 39 Ether in it right now. So the smoothing pool is functioning like as expected, essentially. The last rewards period, we saw a complete end-to-end test where it was the fee distributor or fee recipient for a lot of people. It was receiving priority fees both from MEV and non-MEV users. It had a balance. The rewards period was calculated. It distributed that balance. Part of it went to the rETH stakers. It was like 40 something Ether, 41 or something. And the rest went to node operators and was distributed accordingly. So, I mean, interval one essentially saw a complete run of the smoothing pool system, and it works exactly as expected, which isn't really a surprise considering it's working on Praetor for like months and months at a time. But it was nice to see it work in real life. So essentially, the smoothing pool, functionally, it's fine. The node operators, we see a lot of smaller nodes opting into it and larger nodes kind of leaving it alone for now. But it is accumulating balance. It is distributing balance. It's doing exactly what it was intended to do, and it just warms my heart to see it working that way.
Yeah. I bet it does. It's excellent. I get a lot of fun just kind of watching it grow too, being a member in the smoothing pool. So it's kind of addicting to kind of see what it's doing. And I saw that there's a couple of 1+ ETH MEV blocks that participants had mined out of there. So it was a little exciting the past couple of days.
Oh yeah, I mean that's exactly what it's all about. It's not just getting blocks; it's about getting good blocks, right? And most of the blocks
exactly.
they're worth like what 0.01 Ether to zero point 0.1 or something like that. The tips vary, and then occasionally you'll have like an NFT mint or whatever, and sometimes you'll see these blocks with like 2 or 3 Ether rewards, and they all just go straight to the smoothing pool. You'll love to see that.
Yeah, indeed. Well, maybe let's pivot a little bit. Maybe Mav could chime in on some of these next questions that are about the RE side of the house. So it's completely flipped since I think last time we talked here, and now I haven't checked this morning, but the deposit pool might be nearing full. But let's talk incentives. Mav, what's the latest with the incentives? Where should people be investing their rETH?
I just pulled up the deposit pool now on RocketScan, and yep, it's 99.99% full. And you could say that's clear evidence that the rETH incentives have worked. I think probably first of all, it's important to make the distinction that the intent of the primary intent of the incentive is to create the depth of liquidity that's expected from an LSD, right? A liquid staking derivative. One of the other outcomes is the minting of rETH. And certainly if you align the timelines, it looks like a good portion, most if not all of the surge in deposits is due to the liquidity incentives. But at the same time, you can't really be 100% sure that it's all come from these incentives, right? We talk about attribution modeling in marketing, whereby when you get a conversion, when someone uses your product, there could be a lot of reasons that influence them to make that purchase, right? They might have seen banner ads, they might have seen someone talking about it on Twitter. In the more traditional worlds, maybe they saw a billboard somewhere or something on TV, and you want to kind of work out what proportion of each of these, I suppose, exposures to the brand influence the person's decision making. I think we can probably confidently say that a good portion of the reason why this surge of deposits has come in has been the incentives, but obviously as we know, the wider market also has a great influence in, and I guess pretty much every protocol, right, including Rocket Pool. Certainly, if you go back and have a look at the deposit pool over time, there was a period, almost the first half of the year, right? Certainly between kind of like March and early May, when the deposit pool was full as well back then. So you could say that it's kind of a reversion to the mean, that at the moment there's more demand for deposits than there is for node operators, and that following a period of market uncertainty, we've kind of returned to that state. Probably a little bit of both. I guess what this points to is there's probably not a good reason right now for the IMC to kind of press pause and say, well, we've accomplished our mission. There you go. There's all your deposits. And to kind of walk away and turn off the incentives, because it's not necessarily that straightforward. First of all, we still want to maintain the liquidity because that's the main goal of the IMC. And second of all, we don't know exactly what will happen if we turn off those incentives. It may be that the deposit pool starts to drop back down over time instead of staying full. And also, we don't want these incentives to be kind of a short-term thing. We don't want people kind of jumping around and learning that sometimes Rocket Pool will turn off on the incentives and sometimes they'll turn off, and they have to kind of like jump back and forth. Perhaps people then selling their rETH to go and farm yield elsewhere. We want their liquidity to be sticky, and certainly there's at least a few more months where we need this additional liquidity. So I guess that kind of sums up the current situation. In terms of what's available right now for your rETH, I think the big thing that a lot of people, including myself, not financial advice, are waiting on are these Optimism Grant tokens. And once they are deposited in, there are quite a few of them. We should expect to see some relatively attractive opportunities for people to generate yield with their rETH. But for now, it seems that the main opportunities are more so on mainnet through Aura. If you are not experienced or would want a few pointers on how to do that, I'm sure someone in trading would be able to help you out. But last time I checked, there were still some reasonably good APRs available there on mainnet. And the bridging operation over to Optimism, should you wish to avail yourself of those incentives once they arrive, is relatively straightforward. I did it myself a couple of times back in the day. Not that it was very long ago, but it feels like it was a long time ago. So once those tokens are available, another great opportunity there. And the latest on that is I believe Langers would have shared it recently. We've had a few calls lately. Is that there was a need to KYC recipients, everyone who is in the multi-sig. So we've tapped a few of the ODAM members to help out with that. And the proposal of how to proceed has been sent back to the Optimism Foundation. So ball is back in their court, and hopefully not too much longer to wait until we've got those tokens.
Yeah, perfect. Let me ask some follow-up questions on that. I guess one of the things you mentioned is kind of the different pathways, right? Like, does an rETH holder, do they go for balancer on mainnet and then restake their balancer tokens, I guess, with Aura, or do they start the migration over to Optimism, kind of figuring that we'll get the OP incentives and Beethoven over there? But are there guides? Are there, I was thinking like Jasper back in the day did safe aping with rETH. Is there plans to do some kind of guides that just would explain a neophyte like me exactly what to do in order to go pursue these lucrative offers?
I think once the Optimism tokens are in, at that point, I'm intending to create a little bit more content around that. I suppose one of the tricky things is that as you start to move away from the rocket pool protocol itself to not only a third party but multiple third parties, and the interactions between them, it can be a little bit more tricky to kind of stay across all the latest updates, and also if it's somewhat of an official document, to ensure that it remains kind of objective. But certainly once those tokens are in from Optimism, there is a little bit of I suppose you could call it marketing. It's more of the kind of organic kind, but that has been drafted up and kind of put on hold in terms of graphics, tweets, perhaps a short guide that was kind of intended to be the big splash event, I guess, that kind of makes a bit of a headline that you can talk about in terms of the number of rewards that are available. Unfortunately, just with the delay from those tokens, it hasn't quite worked out perhaps as well as we would have liked. But yes, there will be some additional content being released around that. All going well, hopefully in the not too distant future.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, for somebody like me who is, still very much a learner in the DeFi space, I would very much appreciate, just some very simple explainer guides or explainer, instructions, almost as good as Joe's documentation is for being a node operator, right? In exactly how to do it. I think that would really help in our DeFi integrations.
That's a pretty high bar, but
yeah, no, I know. But hey, look at me, I'm a node operator now, just thanks to Joe's guides, right? I didn't know anything about Linux beforehand, but here we go. So then the other thing that kind of comes up is, I was thinking a lot lately about kind of the core mission of Rocket Pool, right? And some people might argue that it's securing the Ethereum blockchain as node operators. Others might say that our primary product is block space, very much just like any other Ethereum node is to produce block space and sell block space. But one argument I've heard, and I kind of gravitate to at least a little bit for this conversation, is our primary purpose in Rocket Pool is to mint rETH, right? To provide liquid staking for those that don't operate a node. And now with the deposit pool full, we're somewhat unable to produce the product, right? It's sort of like we're an automaker whose assembly line is now frozen, right? There's not a way to produce it. So what are kind of the thoughts and plans on there, right? We've got these incentives out there. There's going to be a huge demand for rETH that will now be selling at a premium at marketplace as people try to get into these large and lucrative incentives. But how do we start producing more rETH? What are some of the thoughts around there? And I don't know if you want to talk about Atlas or if we can transition to that, but how do we, we're kind of swinging between these roadblocks we've got more node operators in a queue, and now we are completely out of nodes in many pools, and we have got the biggest demand of deposits in the deposit pool that we've ever had.
Yeah, I'll say a little bit, and then maybe I don't know if Joe wants to follow up with some more specifics around the work that's going into Atlas, but it's the team's belief that in the kind of longer term, it's likely that there's more likely to be constraints on the node operator side rather than the demand for rETH. In other words, rETH as a product, the minting of that, LSD, it's likely to be in high demand. And the challenge will be ensuring that there's sufficient node operator capacity to keep up with that demand. And I think between now and then, there's obviously a few protocol upgrades and a few things that are going to be done that will address that. But certainly when it comes to a decentralized setup like Rocket Pool, it is kind of hard to avoid swinging from kind of one extreme to the other, whereas a more centralized outfit like our friends over at Lido, they obviously don't face some of these concerns because of their more centralized setup when it comes to node operators kind of being able to spin up as many as they want there. Whereas we obviously rely on our decentralized global network of mini pool operators. So I guess in terms of an easy, straightforward answer, well, I mean, if there was one, we probably would have implemented it by now. But obviously, your favorite topic, Ken, LEBs, that will be a huge step to making the node operators' capital more efficient, which unlocks the creation of more mini pools and therefore obviously allows the minting of a considerable larger volume of rETH. So at that point, we may very well swing back to the other extreme, whereby there's a queue, people are wanting to spin up mini pools, the deposit pool's empty, and we may have to step up the incentivization of rETH. And I don't know if we're going to talk about this a little bit later on, but it has been a governance topic that's come up recently, is other ways to kind of incentivize rETH through potential partners. And that's something that right now is probably not necessarily needed, but something that can be looked at in the future.
Yeah, no, definitely that's coming up here on the agenda for it. But in terms of node operators, yeah, no, I know it's not an easy fix for it. Maybe Joe can talk a little bit about. I understand there was some bread last night I missed about LEBs. What can you share with us, Joe? And there's a question from Dondo Chaka that asks you to kind of actually put a percent on it. Like how far are we on LEBs?
Okay, yeah, I will talk about what I know. So essentially, Kane has been working on the contract side of LEBs. He was working on the SaaS stuff for a while, and then based on community sentiment, kind of switched gears and moved over to LEBs as the primary driver. And from an implementation perspective, I believe he's basically done. There are some design considerations because we want to make sure that we get it right the first time and we don't kind of like end up rugging anybody with an overhaul or anything like that later on. So that we've been working through. So some of the fine implementation details. I'll give you an example real quick. When you make a new mini pool, you have to do it in 2 deposits because of the withdrawal credentials exploit that exists on the Ethereum layer, right? This is something that has existed since before we launched. It's kind of like a known thing that you have to do your 16th deposit, and then you get the 16th deposit from the staking pool as well, that kind of thing. It's a little like that hasn't changed. You have to do a deposit first to verify your withdrawal credentials before Rocket Pool gives you the bulk of the deposit from the rETH users to make sure you didn't front run the withdrawal credentials, essentially. And that has an interesting ramification when it comes to LEB, specifically when it comes to being able to convert a 16 Ether mini pool to 2 8 Ethers. So like this sort of legacy conversion system. And the problem is when you create a new validator on the beacon chain, you need to do this deposit. And the smallest amount that you're allowed to deposit is 1 Ether. So when you create your first mini pool, it's already there. Or when you migrate your first mini pool, rather, from a 16 to an 8, it already exists and it's just bookkeeping. There's no special rigmarole. But when you make the second one, you need to have that deposit go into the beacon chain. And your credit balance for that will be 8 Ether. But all 8 of that Ether comes from the deposit pool because you've already given 16 out, right? And so if the deposit pool is empty, even though you have enough credits to create a mini pool, you can't actually do it because there's not enough Ether in the deposit pool to do this 1 Ether transaction to send your initial deposit to the beacon chain or to the beacon deposit contract, right? So there are little quirks like that, as an example. These kind of like implementation details, and we're thinking, do we need to fix this, or can we just tell the user, like, look, we know you have credit for this thing, but the deposit pool is empty. There's not actually any real Ether that we can use to deposit, so you can't deposit and just fail out, that kind of thing. And we ended up going with a simple solution mostly, which is just error out and let the user know that they will have to try again once the deposit pool has enough Ether for them to do an actual deposit. That kind of stuff. So we're down to like the nitty gritty things. Mostly the high level kind of details have all been figured out. They've all been implemented. He's already done them in the contracts and that kind of stuff. So it's from a percentage standpoint. I don't know if I want to give a percentage because that's really more his wheelhouse. I can offer where I am from the smart node side of things because there's really two sides. From the smart nodes side of things, I haven't done any work on LEPs yet. I've been too focused on post-merge stuff. I've mostly been helping Kane do the theory crafting on like how it's going to work and that kind of thing. So I've got a good sort of like laundry list. I've got a good to-do list now that most of that has been decided as far as what the smart node needs to be able to support in order to do LEPs. And that gives me something to build against, which is really useful instead of just sort of like stubbing things out and guessing, essentially. So I would say most of the stuff that we've done is like academic at this point. And now that we know what we're building against, I can potentially write up like, if necessary, I can write up a spec for it, like I did with the Merkle tree and with the penalty system and all those kind of things that the community has asked for. I can write one of those up, and then we can pass it along, make sure that it gets everybody's approval, I suppose, so there's no glaring errors. And in parallel, I can be building against that, essentially. So all of that is a very long-winded way, coming back full circle, of saying LEBs conceptually are mostly finalized, and now it's all about just building in the implementation details. And I understand that if withdrawals come in very quickly, there is time pressure to get solo staking migration in play, which is not LEBs. It's totally different from LEBs, but it does leverage some of the functionality that LEBs allow, such as the credit system. And we certainly need to have something like that in place for when the 0x00 to 0x01 sort of credential upgrade is enabled at the protocol level. So it's definitely on my radar. I haven't forgotten about it at all. It's probably the most important thing that I'm doing right now. And if necessary, LEBs will take a backseat to that because we have to have that ready when the credential migration goes live, right?
Yeah, because then, and will that also, I mean, so the solo staking conversion, does that also apply to withdrawals too? Is that one of the reasons to must have that ready, or am I missing something?
No, you don't. It doesn't have anything to do with withdrawals. I think it's going to be built in at the same hard fork that will allow withdrawals, or at least allow skimming, if not full withdrawals. But it doesn't have to be per se. Like they could add the credential migration stuff in place without any withdrawals or without any skimming or anything like that if they so choose, just to sort of like get things prepared for it. And I still have to have solo staker migration ready for that, essentially. So that's what I'm working on at a highest priority level is solo staker migration, which comes with some of the Atlas stuff. And then I mentioned this before, but essentially, like if that's the case, LEBs will be built in at a contract level, but they may not necessarily be built in at a smart node level, which is okay because it means like the contracts are in place, the audits have been done, and all of that kind of stuff. And it's mostly just on me to actually give people the tooling to leverage them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, man. You probably don't want to be the one person holding it up, man. I can feel the pressure already. But
Wouldn't be the first time.
Yeah, but it makes absolute logical sense there. So in terms of Atlas and everything that's going to be ready, and I suspect probably next week in some of the conversations at DevCon, there'll be a more discussion about withdrawals and what's next. I know there's been lots of argument and debate, I suppose, on the Ethereum core dev Discord about when Shanghai, when Capella, and so forth. But what's your confidence level in getting all of this thing done? The credentialing, the skimming, the solo conversion, the LEB8s, and in time for audits. Are we getting nervous? Are we on track? Are we feeling good?
That's kind of a Kane question, honestly, because the audits are really his purview, since they're involving in a contract thing. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I know he has been working tirelessly to get the LEB stuff done, and it's getting pretty close. Last I checked, he had so basically the way he builds things is he writes some implementation stuff, but mostly he writes like unit tests and test cases and essentially makes like a fake version of the chain with this sort of like test code in place to see that the contracts work as expected. So a lot of his stuff is sort of like test-driven development. And he has, I don't know, 200 something test cases last I checked, and one of them was failing. So he's basically done. And I think he's at the point where we can start like putting this into the next round of audits at the very least. So I think he's probably confident from that perspective. But again, the fact that the contracts are in place and the audits have been done and stuff like that, people still can't use it until I build it into the smart node. And my priority right now is the solo state configuration stuff.
Okay, perfect. I don't know, Mav, if you have anything else to share on the topic, or?
I think Joe's covered it off pretty well.
All right, excellent. Yeah, well, we'll definitely let us, the community, know if there's anything we can do to help in this, because we do know that there's lots of competing priorities and a timeline that is ever shifting with the core devs and withdrawals. But it does seem like it's a pivotal point in Rocket Pool's trajectory here about just the opportunities for node operator growth, both from LEBs and from solo migration, that there's going to be a real opportunity. I think that if we can make it all happen, we can really accelerate the growth of the protocol and provide much more capability and capacity for rETH holders in terms of the ability to mint and redeem rETH. So I'm looking forward to it. In fact, almost as I'm looking as much forward to that as I did the merge, to be quite honest. Let me ask about this other thing I saw that Jasper was on a tweet storm about, this thing called an Eigenlayer. I must admit, I've never heard the term before. What is Eigenlayer? What does Rocket Pool know about it, and why does Jasper think we should really be looking at it?
Well, it is a very technical topic, and one that's only kind of just emerging. So while I may not be the most qualified to speak on it, I will do my best to kind of provide a high-level overview. And yeah, you're not wrong, Ken. There was quite a lot of attention on Twitter from that kind of coverage that Jasper put out. There is a recording of a Twitter Spaces that maybe the next time Joe's talking, I can try and find it and drop the link in trading, so I'm not multitasking. But there was a Twitter Spaces recently where I believe one of the founders or someone working on Eigenlayer was talking all about it, that apparently was worth a listen to. Unfortunately, I didn't get around to listening to it myself. That's on my to-do list for later today. But for anyone who's keen to learn more, that's a good place to go. I can share that there has been an introductory discussion between Eigenlayer and Rocket Pool. Dave and Langers had a call a few days ago, and the reason why this call took place and why there might be scope for Eigenlayer and Rocket Pool to work together is because of what Eigenlayer is. And I guess the best way to explain it is to go back to kind of some of the principles of the Ethereum blockchain, right? We know that it is one of the most secure and reliable blockchains around. Ethereum's proof of stake system is best in class, right? There is no second best, you could say. And not only that, it's not necessarily an incredibly taxing operation for, well, at least for most of the time, for your node hardware to perform, right? It's not as if we're mining Bitcoin, or even a few months ago mining Ethereum with kind of industrial scale hardware. So we have this system that is industry leading in terms of providing validation, security, assurance, uptime. And not only that, it's not necessarily taxing on hardware to perform. So the point of Eigenlayer is, what if you could use this network of Ethereum validators to provide the same service for other things, whether that's potentially other blockchains or other types of applications, right? you can kind of provide that same level of service. I guess it's kind of like a validator as a service almost, right? Who knows? Maybe in the future you could have Cardano by Ethereum. If they wanted to, they could leverage the power of Ethereum validators to secure what they're doing. Although I guess if you think about secure, there needs to be kind of transactions and things happening and things worth securing. But maybe one day they'll get there. I think the point of why this is so exciting to a lot of people is that it potentially provides an additional use case for Rocket Pool mini pool operators. Obviously, with that comes an additional revenue stream. As with most things, an increase in return also presents an increase in risk. So at the same time, that, as a mini pool operator, you're expected to ensure relatively good uptime, not perform any actions that could be detrimental to the blockchain, not get yourself slashed. It would be the same with any kind of operation that would be happening with Eigenlayer. It would potentially expose you to that additional level of risk. So not only are we talking about a relatively new and emerging arena where there's a lot to learn, certainly for myself and a lot of others. It's something that if and when that opportunity does arise, we would definitely caution all node operators to look into very carefully. There's no free lunch in this world, and by taking on additional services, you're expected to perform. And if you don't perform, as is perfectly reasonable, there may be penalties involved. So really early days to be talking about a whole lot of this stuff. And I'm sure Jasper or one of the two others in trading may be able to provide some more context. And I would not be surprised to see additional Twitter threads in the future on this topic too. But when we kind of put out this notification about the community call this week, I thought, well, there's been a lot of calls recently. We had Dave and Langers on yesterday with Bankless DAO. We had that kind of hybrid chit chat on Friday where we did a bit of a recap of the Biweekly. But even then, right, it's kind of hard to keep up with all the developments in this space. It literally does seem that every single day there's something new cropping up, some exciting development. So great to see. And I would not be surprised to see kind of more collaboration between Rocket Pool and Eigenlayer in the future, and for it to be mentioned, of course, on more of these calls as more details come through.
Yeah, no, perfect, Nick, or perfect, Mav. That was excellent for the kind of explaining it, and great to just hear of the exploratory efforts and looking to see if there could be win-win opportunities for node operators. It was really excellent to kind of see the perspectives on this a little bit. Maybe let's talk a little bit because you're right, there still is some items on the agenda to get through, and this is even from a very busy week. That in governance, there's a new Rocket Pool improvement proposal, number 15. You want to talk a little bit about that? And then I also saw that Langers put out in the governance channels some talk about an rETH referral program. So can I ask you to talk about both those topics?
Sure. Sorry, that was the word that I was thinking of, the referral program, when I kind of referred to incentives at one point earlier in terms of additional steps that could be taken to, I guess the word is to incentivize, but anyway, to encourage the minting of more rETH. But we'll get to that as point two. Point one being ARPIT 15, which is the creation of the GMC, which is I guess you could say it follows along. It's a cousin of the IMC. IMC obviously being the section of the PDAO that deals with incentives, and GMC being the section of the PDAO that deals with grants. So Grants and Bounties Management Committee is what the GMC is, detailed under ARPIT 15. And you may recall that 30% of the PDAO's budget has been allocated to this. We have half going to liquidity incentives. Obviously, The IMC is doing a great job of deploying those funds effectively right now. And obviously that was certainly a kind of a high priority task to get out the door for a few reasons. But we, I suppose, not necessarily turning our attention to, but expanding to deploy those the 30% of the PDAR funds allocated to grants and bounties. So the voting for RPIP 15, essentially, like as we've done for IMC, it sets up a structure, right? So what are the goals and objectives? How will we reach those goals and objectives? And kind of outlines a bit of a framework in terms of grants and bounties. I think it's quite important, just like with IMC, that it's not a case of just splashing RPL around. It should be done in a well thought out manner, and it should be consistent over time, right? I think that's important. Probably even more so when it comes to something like grants and bounties. We don't want to be handing out 1 or 2 RPL here and there, and then later on dumping large amounts on, I'm going to say on the market, but hopefully not on the market. But of course, the recipients are free to do with the RPL what they want. But handing them out for kind of similar actions and vice versa to kind of deplete the PDAL fund immediately, and not to have much in reserve for any great initiatives that may be taken later on. Judging by the level of skill and care that the IMC has carried out the deployment of PDAL funds for incentives, I'm sure it will be the same for grants and bounties. But if you head along to vote.rocketpool.net, there you can see the progress of the voting. It's been open for a couple of days, and as usual runs for 7 days. So it will end 6:25 p.m. on October the 11th in my time zone. So I guess that's probably morning of October 11 UTC, and probably late evening October 10th for those in the US. We've currently got 2.8k vote power in out of the 4.5 required to meet quorum, and it is largely for the approval of RPIP 15. If you want to learn a little bit more, maybe you're not a mini pool operator, so you're not voting, but you're still wanting to stay informed, that link, vote.rocketpool.net, also includes links to read the full RPIP 15 proposal on GitHub and some of the discussion that took place on the DAO governance forum. So once, assuming that quorum is reached and that RPIP 15 is implemented, we should expect shortly thereafter to see some progress in terms of rolling out some RPL for these grants and bounties, which would be great to see.
Yeah, and I too just wanted to kind of comment on it, that I encourage everybody to read it and to definitely vote on it. I know it's a thing that would allow the grants committee to reward those that have already contributed great products and effort in the community already, and kind of the retrospective grants, but also to fund future development. And I know that Joe is particularly excited about this because it may offer an opportunity to kind of outsource some of the work and free up some of the devs' time. So I definitely encourage everybody to take a look at the protocol and definitely vote on the proposal, and definitely vote either way on it, but definitely get engaged. Maybe tell us a little bit about this proposal for this rETH referral program. I mean, it sounds like you said, it sounds kind of odd with the deposit pool full that we're talking about this, but it seemed like this had some potential. And what is Langers asking for from the community in his request for comments?
Yeah, so I suppose for context here, we can look at what another protocol has done in this area. So we can kind of use that to frame the discussion, or how we think about rETH referrals. So our friends over at Lido, again, a little while back, they they implemented a process whereby people could stake their ETH direct from their ledger. So it was a relatively straightforward implementation. Obviously, I haven't used it myself, so I can't comment. But from what I've heard, essentially, it's the ease of having kind of the ledger front end user interface to be able to, within one or two clicks, relatively straightforward process of staking ETH. And obviously, Ledger themselves do not kind of maintain any ETH staking protocols. So on the back end, it was hooked up to Lido. And in return for making that system available in terms of promoting the use of Lido's ETH staking services, Lido would reward Ledger with some LDO tokens. And I don't know necessarily all of the terms, but relatively generous, relatively open-ended in terms of providing these referral payments to Ledger. Obviously, for us at Rocket Pool, for a time, it was difficult for us to replicate this and to implement any of these kind of staking arrangements with Ledger and the like. And the reason for this was the 24-hour delay on our ETH. So with that removed, opens up the potential to pay referral bonuses. Obviously, our inflation of the RPL token is quite conservative at 5% a year, and most of that is allocated in terms of paying the ODAL, in terms of node operators' RPL rewards, and then obviously a chunk going to the PDAO as well. So it's not as if we have kind of a bottomless pit of tokens to hand out to Ledger or whoever as referral payments. So the feedback that's being sought, the discussion that's happening, is how should we structure a referral system so that it incentivizes Ledger or whoever to present Rocket Pool as an option for staking ETH, and therefore the minting of rETH. One thing to consider is that, as with, I suppose, marketing as well, it's important to think about the fact that some referral payments may be going to people who would stake their ETH with Rocket Pool anyway. So as much as possible, we would obviously want to avoid paying for an outcome that was already going to happen. But at the same time, it's also difficult to know exactly how that will play out. Just like with the liquidity incentives, right? We don't know what would have happened if those incentives didn't go out. How much of a surge would there have been into the deposit pool, if any? Difficult to tell. But certainly, one thing to keep in mind is when it comes to any of these partners like Ledger or whoever who may be the recipient of a referral payment, we should think about what exactly they will do, what kind of direct actions they will take, what indirect actions they will take. Are they going to simply present Rocket Pool as an option, or are they going to actively encourage people to utilize Rocket Pool with some kind of call to action? So it's early stages, as you point out, Ken, not necessarily a high priority right now, but it will certainly at some point become necessary if we're talking about, LEB 8s, 4s, whatever it may be. There's the potential for at least at some point to be kind of a short-term flip back to we have a deposit pool empty and we're wanting to be kind of soliciting deposits to facilitate the minting of rETH. So good to have this conversation now, pass through the kind of relevant governance channels to gather feedback and to see the best way to fund and to structure these referral payments.
Yeah, and I definitely think that now even with the deposit pool full, it's the time to think about it, because what I heard earlier in the call is that Joe is feeling very positive about LEB 8s and its inclusion in Atlas, and and if Atlas is on track, that means LEB 8s are going to be here sooner than we know. And once that happens, it's actually a 3x in our capacity for rETH, right? So whatever the rETH number we have today, multiply that again and then again once more, and that's how much capacity we'll have to mint our ETH with the existing node operators. That's not even adding one more node operator. So that's a tremendous amount of our ETH that we have to be able to sell and provide. And I think clearly looking at these incentive programs might be the way to solve that next problem coming down the pike.
That's the one.
Yep. As we get kind of into the end here, I know we've already gone a little bit over, but can you comment a little bit about the dev team? I know that I guess Langers and Kane are going to be out at DevCon. I'm pretty excited because I get to meet them in real life. I think I'm actually more excited about that than actually attending DevCon, if that makes any sense. But what about rumors of hiring here? Is there truth to that? What do you know? What can you share?
Well, first of all, I can share that right now, Langers and Kane are probably at Brisbane Airport. I believe, if I've got my time zone calculations right. They have a flight to Sydney and then onwards to, I think it was LA and Houston, and then down to Colombia. But anyway, the start of a relatively long journey for them over to DevCon. And yeah, take the time to point out that we are intending to have them report in live from Bogota next week. Obviously depends on a whole lot of things, logistics, what their days are looking like, the availability of kind of a location, whether we can potentially live stream some video or whether it's audio only, whether we can get a secure enough Wi-Fi connection. But that is the intent. So we should get some kind of breaking news from DevCon itself. And I'm guessing, Ken, if you're around, that kind of invitation would obviously extend to you to be part of that call, even though it's been a few weeks in a row now that you've been on with us. So yeah, hopefully they're not too jet lagged, and hopefully I'm sure your presentation and Langers will go well. In terms of the other topic being the rumors of hiring, which certainly more than rumors. Anyone who listened to the Bank Style chat, I believe it was on that chat yesterday, Dave said that there is a process underway to look at onboarding more resource in terms of the time frame, in terms of whether we're talking about one person more, whether it's kind of like a contracted position. I don't have any details to share right now. Maybe we can check in with Langers on that next week, but it is something that is being more than looked at. Dave and Langers are investigating the best way to kind of get this done, because they are aware that there could be some benefit in bringing on additional developer resource, especially at this kind of critical point in time. The fact that withdrawals will be a one-time event, right? So we want to be as well positioned as we can, and if that means bringing on more resource on a temporary or perhaps even a permanent basis, something worth looking into. So watch this space.
Yeah, that's great news. I know there's a number of people in the community that I see constantly post pull requests up on the GitHub, or just have done just amazing work and support. And I'm really hoping that those individuals that are contributing just as a community member will seriously think of the opportunity that could be afforded to them here, because there is just tremendous talent in the community, and it would be great to see them part of the Rocket Pool team. So if you're thinking about it, definitely keep thinking about this opportunity that's coming. Any other things? I know we've kind of gone a little bit over here, but from Joe and Mav, or anybody in the community, are there any topics we didn't cover today yet that people want to bring forward?
Well, yeah, it's certainly been a great chat, right? Lots to talk about, and again, kind of a bit silly that I thought we could maybe skip this week. There is a whole lot going on, so maybe if if there's any kind of questions or comments coming through from the community, from the audience, we can cut to that. But until then, I will just go through a couple of notices. Actually, maybe there's just one, in that we will be back on again tomorrow, just over 24 hours, for the weekly Discord chit chat. There's nothing really planned for that. I'm guessing Langers and Kane will probably be in the air somewhere. So not exactly sure who's going to be on the call, but yeah, we can have a chat about whatever's going on in the market, various cheating scandals, chess, fishing, poker, whatever. So yeah, hope to see everyone there. That's in the Rocket Pool Discord, in our chit chat audio channel. And at the same time, if there's any developments or questions about Rocket Pool itself, we can always talk shop if it comes to that. But yeah, it would be great to see people come along. It's 1 p.m. my time. That makes it midnight UTC. So apologies to our European listeners for that. But I think the following Friday, or the following week, we'll be intending to have a chit chat around kind of this time. So if it's a bit late for you, keep an eye out for the Europe-friendly chit chat coming soon.
Excellent. Well, I don't see any questions in trading, and no one's come forward here. So maybe we will call it the end of our community call for today. And I'm looking very much to joining the chit chat for tomorrow. Mav, pleasure talking to you. Joe, it's been a pleasure as well too.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Joe. And thanks to everyone
listening. Thanks, guys.
All right. Catch you guys all later.
See ya.
Take care, everyone.